The rain hammered against the conservatory glass, a wild, urgent rhythm that mirrored the frantic beating beneath my own ribs. It was a Sunday, usually a day of quiet contemplation over blueprints, but tonight, the only structure I cared about was the fragile, electric space between us. Her name was Elara, and she moved with the liquid grace of a masterpiece, every gesture an unspoken sonnet. I, Leo, the architect who built towers of glass and steel, found myself entirely undone by the subtle curves of her smile. We were sheltering in the glasshouse attached to my old Victorian home, a place of impossible humidity and the scent of night-blooming jasmine that was almost intoxicating. "You're sketching again, aren't you?" she murmured, her voice a low, throaty vibration that seemed designed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my chest. I placed the charcoal down on the thick paper. It wasn't a sketch of a building, it was a furious, dark study of her face, half-shadowed by the amber glow of the single, tall floor lamp. I can't stop. The light, the mood. Everything is just too much to resist. She walked toward me, slowly, as if crossing a threshold in a dream. She wore a slip dress of deep sapphire that shimmered like water, and her dark, unbound hair smelled faintly of sea salt and smoke, the remnants of the beach bonfire we'd watched earlier. The air was thick, heavy with the perfume of the tropics inside the glass walls, a world away from the cold November storm outside. "Don't stop," she whispered, standing just close enough that the heat radiating from her skin was a tangible pressure against my own. I could see the fine tremor in her lower lip, a reflection of the barely contained anticipation that pulsed between us like a physical, humming wire. "Capture it, Leo. Capture what this feels like. What this feels like." It was a question, a challenge, an invitation. It felt like standing on the edge of a 100-foot drop and realizing I was exhilarated, not afraid. It felt like the moment I finally understood the fundamental physics of desire, an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, and the resulting energy being enough to power a small city. I reached out, my thumb brushing the delicate bone just below her ear. The contact was brief, yet it left a searing, permanent impression. It feels like the blueprint for everything I've ever wanted, finally being drawn to scale. Her eyes, the color of polished onyx, held mine captive. I'd spent our weeks of acquaintance carefully constructing an emotional wall, built of professional distance, witty banter, and shared, intellectual passion for the arts. I'd done it because I knew, instinctively, that falling for her would be less like falling and more like a controlled demolition of my carefully organized life. But now, the foundation was crumbling, the steel beams warping under the intense, focused heat of her gaze. "I'm tired of blueprints, Leo," she said, her voice dropping to a near inaudible register, intimate and dangerous. "I want to see the finished structure. The one you keep hidden behind all the sharp angles and meticulous design." The sudden intensity of her honesty was a blow. I took a step back, needing air, needing to remember the rules of gravity and sanity. But the glasshouse was too small, the air too thick with jasmine and Elara. "The finished structure is rarely as perfect as the initial concept," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. She closed the distance I'd created, her hands coming up to rest lightly on the lapels of my linen shirt. The contact was featherlight, yet it anchored me more securely than any foundation pile I'd ever designed. I could feel the subtle shift in her breathing, the rapid, shallow rhythm that matched mine. "Perfection is boring," she countered, her fingers tracing the line of the stitching on my shirt. "I prefer passion. I prefer the honest, messy reality of something truly built, truly lived in. I prefer this." And then she did the one thing I hadn't anticipated, she didn't kiss me. She simply leaned her forehead against my chest, right over my heart, and exhaled slowly. It was a profound, breathtaking act of trust. It was not a demand, but an invitation into a shared vulnerability. She was giving me the silent signal that her own carefully maintained composure had finally fractured. The tension, which had been a taut, vibrating string, suddenly snapped, not with a bang, but with a deep, resonating chord. My hands moved, involuntarily, around her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left for doubt or reservation. The soft, warm weight of her body against mine was the most natural thing in the world, the missing piece of an equation I hadn't even known I was trying to solve. I buried my face in her hair, inhaling the intoxicating scent of salt and flour. Elara, I breathed, her name a prayer on my lips. I have been wanting to do this since the moment I saw you walk into that gallery, talking about the inherent tension in negative space. She laughed, a low, joyful sound that echoed strangely in the glass dome. And I've been waiting for you to stop trying to intellectually analyze the tension and just resolve it. I lifted her head, my fingers tangling in the silk of her hair. My gaze swept over her face, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the vulnerability of her parted lips. The rain outside continued its violent serenade, but inside, a new, quieter world was forming, a private sanctuary built of mutual, consuming desire. Then let's resolve it, I whispered, and I finally lowered my mouth to hers. The kiss was everything the weeks of longing had promised, deep, searching, and absolutely definitive. It was not a beginning, but a culmination, a recognition of a shared, powerful current that had been running silently beneath the surface of our lives. Her hands slipped from my lapels to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, deepening the connection until the entire world shrank down to the warm, dizzying press of her mouth, the ragged sound of our intertwined breaths, and the absolute certainty that this was more than a moment. This was the opening of a new chapter, the first stone laid in the foundation of something infinitely complex and profoundly beautiful. I felt a dizzying spiral of sensation, the soft friction of her lips, the taste of jasmine and the subtle spice of the wine we'd shared, the impossible heat of her body melting into mine. I moved my hands beneath the dark silk of her dress, tracing the elegant curve of her spine, marveling at the strength and softness held within the sapphire fabric. She broke the kiss, resting her forehead against mine again, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and quick. "Leo," she gasped, her hands now clutching the damp linen of my shirt. "Say something. Say anything." I found I couldn't articulate the seismic shift happening inside me. Words, my usual tools, had failed. They were inadequate to describe the intensity of the emotional connection that had just fused with the physical. I lifted her into my arms, the effortless movement a testament to the adrenaline rushing through me. She wrapped her legs around my waist, a natural, immediate response. Her body felt light, yet utterly essential. I carried her out of the rain-lashed conservatory, through the shadowed dining room, and toward the spiral staircase, the main artery of my home. The air was cooler now, and the scent of old leather and polished wood replaced the jasmine. "The stairs," I murmured against her ear, my voice thick with emotion. I designed them to be structurally sound, but I never anticipated they'd carry a weight quite this precious. "They are carrying the weight of two people who waited too long," she corrected, her voice resolute. I reached the top landing, the floorboards groaning slightly beneath my feet. I walked straight into the master bedroom, a large, austere space that, until this moment, had only ever held my singular, focused life. I gently lowered her to the foot of the bed, our eyes never breaking contact. The silence of the house, broken only by our labored breathing, was a different kind of tension now, not anticipation, but readiness. I watched as her hands went to the straps of her dress, a subtle, slow gesture that was overwhelmingly sensual. I helped her, my fingers brushing the bare, warm skin of her shoulders as the sapphire fabric pooled like liquid shadows at her feet. She stood before me, illuminated by the spill of moonlight through the high window, utterly beautiful and completely revealed. I reached out and simply touched her cheek, a soft, reverent gesture. The storm raged outside, but in here, in this room, a new architecture was being built, one not of glass or steel, but of skin, heart, and the profound, shared chemistry of two lives finally fitting together. I stepped closer, closing the final distance, allowing the current that flowed between us to finally complete its circuit. The longing had finally resolved into its true, incandescent form.